The year's 1944 and the heaviest tank which saw action during World War II is about to make its debut. The name of this vehicle is the Jagdtiger, the Tiger II, or also known as the SD KOZ 182. The Tiger II is generally seen as one of the most magnificent and menacing vehicles which humanity has ever made, and I myself had the pleasure of seeing one of these tanks in the wild in Belgium, and I can say for sure that it leaves quite the impression. And even 79 years after its debut, people still talk about this vehicle. Now, today we're going to take a dive into why the Tiger II is regarded as one of the best tanks of World War II. But first I would like to thank every single one of you guys. We have officially reached the 3,000 subscribers and I am very grateful for that. Let's try to shoot for the 4,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I know it is a tall order, but I'm sure together we can manage. The Tiger II has three main reasons why it stands out. Now, one of the reasons why the Tiger II stands out is because the Tiger II had an insanely powerful main armament, this of course being the 88mm L71, which was roughly the same main armament as the Nashorn and the Jagdpanther. This main armament had already proven itself to be great, especially on long range, and this is due to its penetrating power and its accuracy. The second reason is because the Tiger II had a lot of frontal armor, and the frontal armor of the Tiger II was extremely thick, being one of the best armored vehicles which you saw in combat during World War II. The Tiger II only was behind the Jagdtiger in terms of sheer armor thickness. And the last reason as to why it stands out is because of its terrible reliability. Let's first start off with the Tiger II's main armament. The main armament was derived from the 88 anti-aircraft gun, which proved to be more than capable of handling tanks back in the Spanish Civil War, the invasion of France and the battles in North Africa. Later in 1942, the 88mm main armament was first put on a tank, which I suppose most people by now know. It is of course the Tiger I. However, there's a difference between the main armament of the Tiger I and the Tiger II, because the Tiger I actually uses the 88mm L56, which basically is a shorter and less powerful version of what the Tiger II uses, so that's the 88mm L71. Basically, to explain it easily, the L is basically the diameter of the round, and then the 56 means how many times the diameter of the round, so that is the barrel length. So when you have the 88mm and then do it times 56, that would mean that the main armament of the Tiger I is just under 5 meters, and in the case of the Tiger II it would make it about 6 meters and a quarter. The difference might not seem like a lot, but this actually gave the Tiger II 100 millimeters of additional penetration, which is huge, especially in the end of World War II. It is very useful, and of course with already the accuracy of the main armament, it can be very lethal to have an additional 100 millimeters of penetration, and this allowed the Tiger II to be able to penetrate opposing tanks from a much greater distance. Basically it could probably penetrate every single Allied tank within 2,000 meters, and 2 kilometers away is extremely crazy. It has now been established that the Tiger II had a very good main armament, but how good was its protection? Like I already previously said, the Tiger II is one of the best armored tanks in World War II. Frontally, almost no tank could challenge it, and with its 185mm behind the main armament and the 150mm at the front, it is quite a lot of armor. Of course, as expected, the sides are thinner, and this is of course to make the tank lighter and also not to waste any useful metal. This tank also falls under the idea, the all or nothing side, which basically means that all of the armor is at the front. Now frontally the weakest point is, ironically enough, behind the turret. To be more specific, behind the main armament, and even if it is 185mm, it is still its weak point. At first the Tiger II actually had another type of turret. The initial turret was more round, but due to it being so round, they were afraid of being shot trapped. Basically this would mean that the round would ricochet downwards and it would still penetrate because it's so thin up there. One of the most famous examples, at least of which I could find, would be the Tiger 131, who presumably got shot trapped by Churchill in northern Africa, and the shot wedged itself between the turret mechanism. But by upgrading the turret, this sphere was somewhat removed and would actually mean that it had better frontal protection. All this armor means that only 3 main armaments of World War II would be strong enough to certainly challenge the Tiger II. One of them would be the 90mm M3, which was used by tanks like the Pershing or the M36. The 17-pounder, which was commonly used by the Firefly, but also the Archer tank and the M10 tank destroyer, and the 152mm used by the SU and the ISU line. These 3 main armaments I named could potentially knock out a Tiger II, but keep in mind the Tiger II could also very much knock out all of these vehicles which house these guns. Apart from these 3 main armaments I previously listed, there are others who could potentially also take out a King Tiger II, for example the 122mm from the IS line, but they would have more trouble getting through the armor. Now of course there are still a lot of tanks which would struggle with penetrating the Tiger II frontally, and most of the time when these tanks would engage with a Tiger II, what they would do was they would fire smoke at the Tiger II and then try to flank it. This is of course because at the flanks, like we already previously mentioned, the Tiger II doesn't have a lot of armor. So even tanks like the T-34-85 would be able to take out a Tiger II from the side. Now, apart from resorting to shooting smoke and then trying to flank it, another common tactic was ambush. Now one of the examples I have found was at a town or city named Olgedau, and this immediately gave the Germans a very costly but valuable lesson. 3 Tiger IIs were ambushed by a T-34-85 and knocked out, and this is because the ammo was stored on the side of their turret. Now of course when ammo gets hit and it ignites, a tank which doesn't have any safety precautions has a very big issue. So of course these 3 Tiger IIs were all just knocked out. So due to this incident, the Germans realized that putting the ammunition on the sides of their turrets, on the inside but still on the sides, was not a good idea. So they realized that and they decided, okay, what we're going to do is we are going to remove the ammunition there to make our tanks safer, to make sure that they don't just explode. This would in turn reduce the ammunition carry capacity of the Tiger II, but it would make it safer in the process. All this armor would mean that the tank is quite heavy, of course with the 85mm behind the turret and the 150 on the hull. It will mean that the tank is going to be quite heavy, and if you have such a heavy tank which weighs about 70 tons, you need a very good engine to keep it moving. So the engine chosen for the Tiger II was the Maybach HL230, just like the Tiger I got, just like the Panther got, just like the Yak Panther got, and more vehicles. The engine was actually quite powerful, producing around 600 to 700 horsepower, which for the time was actually quite a lot. The Tiger II's top speed was 41 km an hour and off-road it being reduced to 20 km an hour, but this still for a heavy tank is quite solid. But it wasn't all positive for the Tiger II. The Tiger II is generally seen as one of the most unreliable tanks of World War II, and of course there are several reasons for its unreliability. But in my opinion the main reason would be that crews were inexperienced. Of course this is a common excuse for German armor of why it is unreliable, but considering how heavy the Tiger II is and the conditions they were mostly in, I mean most of the time they were retreating, the wear and tear on the engine is going to be increased significantly. Now of course, apart from there being a lot of strain already on the tank, improper maintenance can only exacerbate this problem, and most of the time due to the crews being unexperienced, this was the case. And regardless of about which tank you're talking, if the tank is not getting the proper maintenance it needs, or the new parts it needs, they are bound to break down. And it doesn't matter about if you're talking about an M4 Sherman, if you're talking about a Cromwell, if you're talking about a Panther, Panzer IV, T-34, if they don't get the proper care they need, they're going to break down. And so was the case for the Tiger II, because it didn't receive the care it needed. Another downside of the Tiger II, maybe not as significant as the unreliability, but it still was a significant one, was that it was massive. I mean, it was almost 3.1 meters tall, 3.7 meters wide, and 7.3 meters long, which is absolutely huge. Such a size is only a downside, as it makes you more difficult to conceal, easier to hit and spot, and such a large vehicle would need more crew members, so you have to train more crew members, and it is more difficult to drive through urban areas and stuff like that. Well, I just mentioned crew, so we're going to talk about what kind of crew it housed. It housed a crew of the driver, the loader, the gunner, the radio operator, and the commander. The driver and the radio operator would be at the front of the hull, and the radio operator would also be a machine gunner, while the commander, the loader, and the gunner would be all positioned in the turret. Now, we have already talked a bit about the weight of the Tiger II, and it is almost 70 tons, which is an incredible weight, but it still isn't even half the weight of the Mouse, but it is still a lot. I mean, it is so monstrous that normal bridges would not even be able to support the weight of the Tiger II, which just basically makes the Tiger II also a logistical nightmare. All this weight would also cost a lot of resources, so creating a single Tiger II would be extremely expensive. So yeah, in the end, as you can expect, not many of them in the end were made, because it was one, expensive, and two, the Allied bombing rates on the factories where the Tiger IIs were made also really slowed down how many Tiger IIs would eventually be made. But then the other question is that even if those Tiger IIs were made, would they even be able to actually use all of those Tiger IIs made? I mean, at the end of World War II, the Germans were already running out of manpower. They were running also out of fuel. They're running, when they're running out of manpower, running out of experienced manpower, because it's so incredibly difficult of actually using these massive beasts in combat, and especially in order for them to be effective. I mean, we've already talked about how it is very difficult to conceal them. You're very easily spot. The only thing that really keeps you alive in there is the massive amount of frontal armor. But if you don't have the experience, it's going to be so difficult, and even if you're just defending. Now, of course, just like most other German vehicles of that time, the Tiger II would see several different versions of itself made. Now, the most popular version would be, and I've already mentioned them several times in this video, the Jagdtiger. Now, the Jagdtiger is incredibly popular, especially under people who play the games, so like War Thunder, like World of Tanks. And the reason why it's so popular is because it used massive main armament. I mean, the 128mm, arguably the most powerful main armament which was used during the Second World War. I believe upwards of 300mm of penetrating power. And the Jagdtiger was also actually used in World War II in dying stages. So yeah, if you want to watch a video on that, you can do so by going to the link here in the top right. Yeah, here's the top right. I'm sorry, it is the other way around for you guys, but you got the point. The Tiger II will not have a very long service career in the armed forces, and this is because the Tiger II would only see its debut in the Battle of Normandy with the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. There were issued about 14 Tiger II tanks, and of which 12 were with the initial turret. However, most of these tanks would either get knocked out in combat or due to reliability, and when this unit finally received reinforcements, they only had 2 Tiger II tanks left. However, one notable thing the 503rd did was the offensive against the town of Samali. This is where 12 Tiger II tanks would mount an offensive, where they lost 2 tanks in the process, but were able to knock out 21 Soviet tanks and 28 anti-tank guns. At the end of the war, the 503rd would surrender themselves to the Americans, however they were handed to the Soviets as prisoners. In the end, according to the unit diaries, they claim to have knocked out 1,700 Soviet tanks and 2,000 guns destroyed by the end of the war, which would be the most of any Tiger unit. The first time the Tiger IIs would make their debut on the Eastern Front was with the 501st at the operation of the Lvov-Zanomierz offensive. The 501st would receive 45 Tiger II tanks, and when this unit would see their first engagement with Tiger IIs, only 8 Tiger II tanks would be operational. Most of the unavailable vehicles would actually be in repairs due to their final drives being broken. After a couple of days, however, they did too receive spare final drive parts. However, due to them being misused in unsuitable terrain, there would still be more losses. The Tiger IIs would also be used in the second most famous battle of World War II, and that of course is the Battle of the Bulge. A lot of the remaining Tiger IIs would be sent to the Battle of the Bulge, but this would be an awful place to use these tanks. These tanks were absolutely massive like we previously discussed, and the Tiger II could not take advantage of its biggest plus, its 88mm. The 88mm is of course very well known of having high penetration and a very, very reliable, stable gun. They used the 88mm of the Tiger II in a forest instead of the flatter lands like the Soviet Union, like Poland, stuff like that. Fighting with these tanks in a forest was far from ideal, and furthermore, Germany was also running very, very low on fuel for its air force, but also for its Panzer army. Eventually, the offensive of the Germans was stopped, halted, pushed back. In the end of the war, about 400 Tiger II tanks were created, and most of these 400 would see combat on the Eastern Front, but also a couple on the Western Front. It is estimated that around 150 Tiger II tanks would take part in the Battle of the Bulge. These days you can still clearly see several Tiger II tanks in either museums or in the wild, and I myself have had the pleasure of seeing the Tiger II tanks in Belgium in La Glaise and also in het Nationaal Militair Museum here in the Netherlands. This is by far the most impressive tank you will ever see, and even though I myself am 186, I barely was taller than the hull, which of course is quite humbling. Overall, I think this is a beautiful but plagued with misfortune and unreliability tank. Anyway, that was the video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, leave it a thumbs up, a comment and whatnot. I would like to thank VW German Looker for being a member of my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.